Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari Yashoda Nandana Vrajajana Ranjana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari tenānuviddhebhyo Paramahamsa Parvajakacharya SYNONYMS His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada Ki Jai Anantakoti Vaishnava Indi Ki Jai ISKCON Founder Acharya Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai Grantharaj Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Jai Gaur Premananda. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to Sri Sri Guru and Gauranga. Glories to Srila Prabhupada. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 3, Chapter 26, Fundamental Principles of Material Nature, Text 51. Tatas tenānuviddhebhyo yuktebhyo ṇḍam acetanam utthitaṁ puruṣo Yasmād udatiṣṭhad asau virāṭ tatas tenānuviddhebhyo yuktebhyo ṇḍam acetanam utthitaṁ puruṣo Yasmād udatiṣṭhad asau virāṭ tatas tenānuviddhebhyo yuktebhyo ṇḍam acetanam utthitaṁ puruṣo Yasmād udatiṣṭhad asau virāṭ tatas tenānuviddhebhyo yuktebhyo ṇḍam acetanam utthitaṁ puruṣo Yasmād udatiṣṭhad asau virāṭ tatas tenānuviddhebhyo yuktebhyo ṇḍam acetanam utthitaṁ puruṣo Yasmād udatiṣṭhad asau virāṭ tenānuviddhebhyo yuktebhyo puruṣo Yasmād Vaishnavis tenānuviddhebhyo tataḥ, then, tena, by the Lord, anuviddhebhyaḥ, from these seven principles, roused into activity, yuktebhyaḥ, united, ṇḍam, an egg, acetanam, unintelligent, utthitaṁ, arose, puruṣaḥ, cosmic being, Yasmād, from which udatiṣṭhad appeared, asau, that, virāṭ, celebrated. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. Translation. From these seven principles, roused into activity and united by the presence of the Lord, an unintelligent egg arose, from which appeared the celebrated cosmic being. Purport. In sex life, the combination of matter from the parents, which involves emulsification and secretion, creates a situation whereby a soul is received within matter, and the combination of matter gradually develops into a complete body. The same principle exists in universal creation. The ingredients were present, but only when the Lord entered into the material elements was matter actually agitated. That is the cause of creation. We can see this in our ordinary experience. Although we may have clay, water, and fire, the elements take the shape of a brick only when we labor to combine them. Without the living energy, there is no possibility that matter can take shape. Similarly, this material world does not develop unless agitated by the Supreme Lord as the virāṭ-puruṣa. Yasmād udatiṣṭhad asau virāṭ. By his agitation, space was created, and the universal form of the Lord also manifested therein. Only Gyanatam Randasya Gananjana Shlakaya Chakshura Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Srivasadi Gaur Bhaktivinoda. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. So in the first line of the purport, Srila Prabhupada describes that in sex life there's a combination of matter that involves emulsification and secretion. So technically the word emulsification means you combine two liquids that normally don't fit together into one. And the primary example that's given is oil and water. If you have a glass of water, you pour some oil into it, the oil will float on top, the water will be on the bottom, they don't mix. So there is a process for mixing them. It's called emulsification. And basically it involves you have the oil, the water, and a surfactant, type of chemical or substance that allows, when you agitate it with, these days, sound vibration or mechanically, the liquids will transform into millions of tiny spheres that mix together. So, like homogenized milk is like that. The milk fat doesn't float on top as it normally would. So that's one meaning of emulsification. But it can also mean, the merging of two substances that are of opposite characteristics. So I looked into the biology of this a little bit. In Srimad Bhagavatam later on, in the Bhagavatam, there's a description of the development of the embryo from an egg, a fertilized egg. How it splits into 2 and then 4. These things weren't understood in modern science until the 19th century, the 1800s. It was in 1865 when the first scientist in Europe discovered the human ovum, the egg in the female body. They didn't have any concept of that until then. And they didn't have any idea of the development of the embryo to even later, or how it's fertilized by a sperm cell. But if you get into the details of that process, you'll see it does involve secretion and a kind of emulsification, in the sense that the boundaries between two objects, biological objects, are dissolved so that they merge together. So that is what goes on. But as Srila Prabhupada is mentioning, there has to be some intelligence behind the whole thing. In the formation of the human embryo and the fetus within the womb, or with any plant or animal, it all starts out with a fertilized egg. And the egg splits into 2 cells, which splits into 4, which splits into 8. And eventually, in the human organism, there are trillions of cells. But it all starts out from one cell. And how each cell knows what it's eventually going to be doing. Am I going to be a brain cell, a neuron in the brain? Or am I going to be a red blood cell or a white blood cell or a cell in the bone or a muscle cell or a hair follicle? There's no real, complete, genuine scientific explanation of how that happens. How each of those trillions of cells knows the role it's going to play in the body. So this organic conception is extended in the Bhagavatam cosmology beyond the forms of the living organisms. The universe itself becomes an organism in the sense that it's a form of God, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Srila Prabhupada mentions it here as the universal form, and the word virāṭ or virāṭ-puruṣa is often used for that. So we're getting a description of the universal form in these chapters that we've been considering. There are many different descriptions of the universal form given one after another in different parts of the Srimad Bhagavatam. So this is one particular form that's concentrating on the developments of the different elements, and then how when they're all in place, the Lord enters, as we were hearing yesterday in the class, enters, and then all the elements begin to combine together and manifest of the different phenomena of this material world. But there are other descriptions of the universal form that more concentrate on the role of the different demigods who are in control of the different elements and senses and sense objects, how they all take their places in different parts of the universal form, but the universal form doesn't become activated until the Lord enters as the super soul. Mahavishnu is like the super soul of the entire cosmic manifestation. Garbhodakshaya Vishnu is the super soul of a particular universe. And then Kshirodakshaya Vishnu is the super soul of a particular organism or individual. Sarvasya Chaham Hridisana Vishnu. I am the super soul situated in the hearts of all living things. ṇḍam paramano chayantarastam. I am situated not only in the hearts of all living beings, but within each atom. So, without the presence of the Supersoul, nothing would actually be happening within the material world. Although many people today don't see that. They think everything is just happening automatically. But if they're asked to describe exactly how all this is happening just by interactions of matter, they can't do it. Or they say, oh, we've got part of the puzzle, we've got part of the picture, and we know we've got a long way to go, and we'll get it someday. You know, I've heard promises like that, like to explain consciousness. You know, this word is mentioned here, acetanam, conscious being. So, you know, 25 years ago, I heard them say, we'll have it all figured out, how consciousness arises from chemicals in the brain in 25 years. 25 years later, they have to admit, we still haven't got it figured out. So, so there, as I said, there are different descriptions of universal forms. For example, in the 5th canto cosmology chapters, Shukadeva Goswami says he's presenting a universal form, but he's responding in particular to Maharaj Parikshit's questions. And one of his questions is he wanted to know the dimensions of the universal form. He says, yes, in previous cantos you've described it in a general way, but I would like to know the specific measurements. So some of those chapters from the 5th canto are expressed in terms of measurements. You know, this varsha is so many yojanas wide and so many yojanas deep. So that's there. Then in Bhagavad Gita, Krishna displayed a universal form to Arjuna for the specific purpose of encouraging him to fight in the battle of Kurukshetra. You know, Arjuna was hesitating to fight, and Krishna showed him, by his request, this a universal form, and he, if anybody's not ever seen the universal form exhibit in the Bhagavad Gita Museum, hopefully they'll be able to see it someday. But in that vision of the universal form, Krishna shows Arjuna, you just be an instrument. You're worried about killing these people. Well, they're already killed. You know, time I am, destroyer of the world, kalosmi lokachaya krit. And he showed Arjuna a vision where all of these soldiers on the battlefield of Kurukshetra were rushing into the destructive mouth of time. And Krishna told him, you can simply be an instrument. You know, so that was that vision of the universal form was to encourage Arjuna to perform his duty and fight on behalf of Krishna in that great battle. And then another time, Krishna displayed universal form to Mother Yashoda. Krishna had been accused of eating dirt by some of his friends and Balaram. And Mother Yashoda said, okay, now I have to look in your mouth. Krishna says, I haven't been eating dirt. They've just been making up stories about me. They've just been making up stories about me. So Mother Yashoda said, okay, let me look in your mouth. And when she looked in, she could see the whole universe, all the planetary systems, all living entities. She could see herself, and she became bewildered, and she began to understand the real nature of her son. But Krishna, although he chose to do that, she was questioning herself. What is this? I'm not insane. I'm not dreaming. What is this? She became completely bewildered and began to pray. But Krishna, he doesn't prefer that type of relationship of awe and reverence. So he quickly covered her over again with his yoga maya potency, so that she again just saw Krishna as her child. So there are different accounts of universal forms presented in different parts of the Vedic literature, for different purposes. But the main one is to remind us that aham sarvasya prabhavo mata sarvam pravartate. Everything is coming from a source, and that source is a person, and everything is under the personal control and supervision of Krishna. Ishvara Parama Krishna. I am the supreme controller, Krishna says. So these accounts of the universal form, virāṭ, are meant to remind us that everything is Krishna's energy. It's Krishna's property. It's meant to be used in his service. We can take our share, our proper share. It's like Srila Prabhupada would give the example very often of an employee in a bank. The employee in the bank, millions of dollars may be going through accounts under his control, but he only takes his salary. If he takes something more than his salary, his appropriate share, then he's held criminally responsible. So in the same way, we have our proper share, each of us, in this world, this material world. So if we take things, our allotted portion, the portion of resources that are allotted to us by Krishna, then everything is fine. But if we take more than what Krishna allots us, then there are reactions to deal with. And this presents a problem to people. They wonder about why is there suffering in this world. But this world is being manifested by Krishna, not for himself, but for us. If we develop a desire to enjoy independently from Krishna, he gives us a place where we can do that, or attempt to do it. It'll never satisfy the soul. The soul never gets satisfied by attempting to enjoy itself apart from Krishna. Sometimes I think, well, what else could Krishna have done? And you could say, well, Krishna could just put us into suspended animation forever. And then you're kind of beyond pain, you're kind of beyond pleasure, you're just in a state of suspended animation. Or he could give you a world where you can be the God of that world. But since that isn't your actual position, you'll never be able to enjoy it. And if you're in a state of suspended animation, you'll never be able to positively enjoy anything. And you could say, well, Krishna could put, if he wants to punish people for turning against him, he could put them in an eternal hellish position. But he doesn't do that either. I think he does the only thing that really makes sense if everyone is an eternal spirit soul, part and parcel of Krishna, but has free will. He gives them a situation where they have the opportunity to try to enjoy independently from him, but makes it clear to them that they're never going to be happy by that. You can try as long as you want, as long as you think you can, go ahead, but the souls are never going to be able to satisfy themselves. So Krishna also offers the opportunity by coming to this world, by manifesting the form of the deity, appearing in the form of the Vedic literature and the spiritual masters who propagate it, to remind people, you just have to turn back to me and you'll have all the enjoyment that you're capable of manifesting. So the first step in realizing that is to understand that everything we see around us is not just there for us to enjoy. It's Krishna's property and meant to be engaged in his service. So that is the ultimate purpose of these descriptions, because ultimately we're not so interested in studying the details of material nature, how it operates. The materialists are very interested in it because they think that by dominating and controlling and exploiting the material energy, they can become happy and satisfied. But so we're not as interested as they are in understanding the material energy for the sake of trying to enjoy, control, and exploit it. We're interested in how it works as an energy of Krishna, as the property of Krishna, so that we can make progress towards going back home, back to Godhead. So I'll stop there. Any questions or comments?
Krishna, I wanted to ask about your last sentence. You said we are interested in these details in order that it. So I want to ask, how does this information, like about how many yojanas in the, like from fifth canto, how these kind of details help us to go back to Godhead?
It's like when you're in the airport trying to go somewhere. You have to understand how the airport works. So, because if you don't understand how the airport works, what its structure is, you don't get to your plane, and therefore you don't get to your destination. So, in those chapters of the Srimad Bhagavatam 5th canto, where the structure in terms of measurements is being described, it is presented as a universal form of Krishna. And Srila Prabhupada, in one of his lectures, says the virāṭ-puruṣa, as described in the 5th canto, is like the form of the deity. It's manifested within the material world, but it's non-different from Krishna. And ultimately it's a spiritual form. It's just like saying, how can appreciating the form of the deity, which is apparently to some eyes made of stone or metal, how can that help us attain the spiritual? It's an arrangement by Krishna. So if we meditate on the universal form, its measurement, its dimensions, where it is situated, and the whole larger scope of things, then we can make spiritual progress. In the beginning of those descriptions, Shukadeva says, if one hears about these descriptions of the universal form and simultaneously hears about Krishna and his personal form, one will gradually come to the point of attaining the service of Krishna in his spiritual form in the spiritual world. So there is a kind of spiritual purpose behind it. I kind of noticed that because of the service that I do, I had to very carefully study that information. And I was surprised when I first studied it very carefully and noticed that at the beginning and the end of those descriptions, Shukadeva Goswami is saying, this is a description of a universal form. So, and that by contemplating it, along with contemplating Krishna's eternal form apart from this world, you get the result of going to the spiritual world. Kevin?
Hare Krishna. Thanks for the wonderful class. So does Sukadeva Goswami mention that this universe, because you earlier in the lecture you were saying that each universe is entered by, what did you say, that Garbhodakshaya Vishnu enters into it? Or so would the universal form be part of the manifestation of Garbhodakshaya Vishnu?
Well, ultimately it's coming from, Krishna says, aham sarvasya prabhavo, from me comes everything. So ultimately it's Krishna's arrangement, Krishna's energy. But the way that he manifested it is through the different forms of Vishnu. So yeah, you could say super soul in the form of Garbhodakshaya Vishnu, who is the super soul of the aggregate of all the living entities in a particular universe, is manifesting that form, or Kshirodakshaya Vishnu, possibly, because it's said that all the avatars of Krishna come through Kshirodakshaya Vishnu, but
Can you elaborate on that? That last point you just made, what realizations you have on that last point?
I mean, Srila Prabhupada mentions it a few times. You know, he just says that I don't have much realization beyond what was said. You know, it's just that, you know, in a few places in his purports and lectures, Srila Prabhupada has mentioned that through Kshirodakshaya Vishnu, the different incarnations come.
And this is my last question, because I've speculated on this a bit, but you were talking about how the human body has trillions of atoms, cells. So like, would the spirit souls, which are atomic in nature, be like atoms within the body of the universal form, which forms Vishnu? Or is that confirmed anywhere, or is that just speculation?
I don't know if I'm understanding your question.
Can we imagine that, like, the universal form, which has a personal form, is conscious of everything because, like, just like we're conscious of all the atoms in our body, if some atom is like malfunctioning, we would be conscious of that. Would it be fair to make, if we meditate on the universal form, that living entities are all like atomic in the body of Vishnu?
We are now in the material world, which has ultimately a personal structure to it. So, yeah, you could say we're part of the universal form. Like when Mother Yashoda looked into Krishna's mouth and saw that universal form, she saw herself and the residents of Vrindavan within that whole form. But ultimately, like is explained by Arjuna, he said that's kind of very awe-inspiring, the vision of the universal form, and it's not possible to relate to it. Like when Mother Yashoda saw the universal form, she was just in awe. And Krishna ultimately he prefers spontaneous loving attraction to awe and reverence. So, okay, we'll stop there. Hare Krishna.
I guess I didn't meditate on that because, in order to like inspire these scientists who like